Thank you, Vern, for writing this in to remind me to do that. All right, so we are recording. The Reverend Dr. David Nelson and the Reverend Dr. Vern Barnet were in seminaries a few blocks away from each other in Chicago in the late 60s onward, but never met. They both attended the first meeting of the North American Interfaith Network in Wichita in 1988, covered by the New York Times, but did not meet. But when the Kansas City Interfaith Council was organized in 1989, they did meet and became friends as well as colleagues when David was pastor of the largest ELCA Lutheran Church in Missouri. David is an appreciative inquiry coach and holds a certificate from the Shalom Institute for Spiritual Direction. In addition to helping individuals discover more meaningful lives, David brings his insights to help transform men serving time in the United States Penitentiary and partnering with men and women in agencies who provide public health and safety through pre-hospital care and community action. One of his many gifts to the community and CRES is his monthly Vital Conversations book club. David is active with and on behalf of those sisters and brothers who have been oppressed or ignored by others. He served as convener of the Christian Jewish Muslim Dialogue Group. For some years, David coordinated the field, the doctoral ministry program for the Lutheran School of Theology. David's many recognitions include the Humanitarian Award given at the Bruce R. Watkins Cultural Heritage Center and Museum, a special commemoration from the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council, an award for pioneering interfaith work in Kansas City and enriching us with the vision and power of mutual appreciation. David's impact on the community was even recognized with his name on the big board at Arrowhead Stadium when the Kansas City Royals gave him the Buck O'Neill Legacy Seat Award. Vern founded CRES in 1989, and the Interfaith Council was created as a program of CRES in 1989. CRES is the oldest continuing multi-faith organization in Kansas City. Vern was employed by the Kansas City Star from 1993 to 2012 to write a weekly column on multi-faith issues. He chaired the County 9/11 Task Force. He led and framed the citywide first anniversary observances of the 9/11 horrors as above all, an interest redirection for personal, community, and national renewal, which was recognized by a half-hour CBS TV special. With 3 others, he edited the 740-page The Essential Guide to Religious Traditions and Spirituality for Healthcare Providers, published in the UK and the United States, and his book of sonnets, Thanks for Noticing, is heavily glossed with notes from the religions of the world. His awards come from Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, and other religious groups, and from civic organizations such as the National Community Leadership Association. He is an assistant professor for religious pluralism at Central Seminary. So I'm very happy to welcome both Vern and David to be here with us today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Vern now.
Thank you so much, Geneva, and I think we all have Ruth Bader Ginsburg in our hearts as we contemplate her passing and the great gifts that she's given to us in promoting an understanding of pluralism. David, you are much more of a sports guy than I am. A few moments ago, before we started, you told me you have I think you said you have a undershirt on that is appropriate, that you're going to whip off your outer shirt after this conversation because you're going to go to a football game, at least virtually. So I'm going to ask you a question about a comment from Sam Mellinger, who is a sports writer for the Kansas City Star. And after that game at which, with the Chiefs, when there were the boos that went around the world, or at least around the country, Mellinger wrote this. Before the Chiefs and Texans starred in America's most watched live event since the Super Bowl, players on both teams were booed. Those doggone athletes were promoting the radical idea of unity. we are better when we act on what we have in common than our differences. Now, my question is about his emphasis on what we have in common. It may be true that we're all alike, but it's also true that we're all different. It's a paradox. But I want to ask you to comment on what Mellinger wrote. And particularly, I want to know, what do we lose? What do we lose when we focus mainly on what we have in common and forget about our differences?
Well, thank you, Vern. I too am really honored to hang out with this illustrious group of people that I'm looking at, and I hope some others on Facebook. I think Sam actually got it wrong. There wasn't that many boos. I was watching the game, and we listened to some of the sports writers, but I think the key point that you're making is really an important one. I don't think you could have talked me into 20 years ago participating in a Gifts of Commonness conference. The reason I was willing to be a part of the Gifts of Pluralism conference is that I find the ways that you are different than me far more interesting than the ways we are having common. I sometimes say this jokingly, and it is kind of a joke. I say, I'm a pretty cool guy. You'd really like to get to know me better, but I can't imagine anything more boring than hanging out with people just like me all the time. It is our uniqueness, our differences in football, in music, and in religion that makes us interesting to each other. So I'm on your side. I'm far more interested in what makes us unique and different and wonderful than what we have just in common. I don't know if that answers. I'll get into sports with you when it's just you and I, but I don't want to waste these people's time on discussing the Kansas City Chiefs, although I am a fan.
Well, you bring up sports and I'm going to bring up opera. So
I know you are.
Well, I want to follow up on what you said. And of course, I do agree with what you said. And I really like the way you make your point in following the terrorist attacks in 2000. My God, is that almost 19 years ago?
Right.
In 2001, 6 weeks after that, we had the Gifts of Pluralism conference, and I'm looking at Larry Galat right now, who was so important in making that successful. But 6 weeks after the attacks, we had a very successful conference, and it was called the Gifts of Pluralism. And I had never thought about, David, the phrase that you used just a moment ago, the gifts of commonality, or whatever it was you said. So yeah, it's pluralism where I think we get the richness in our life. But so my follow-up is, what kinds of questions or approaches can lead us to appreciate one another in our uniqueness, in our specialness? Give us an example or a short course. So you're an expert on appreciative inquiry. Tell us.
Well, one of the main things that we try to do in appreciative inquiry is to identify what works and build on it rather than figuring out what's broken and try to fix it. That's oversimplified, but it's common to all of us. And we'll take that terrible event that we look back to 9/11. And after following 9/11, that was one of the first exposures that some people got to Islam. And it wasn't about Islam at all. It wasn't about Muslims. It was somebody who had kidnapped it. So in working with people and building communication between different groups, it's important to concentrate not on just the things we have in common. We all want peace. We all want to feed the hungry. We all want justice. Some of us are better at it than others, but we all want that. But there are unique gifts that people bring. One of the places that I've had a really honor working is with inmates at the United States, in the Leavenworth prison, the United States prison in Leavenworth, and with the Life Connections program. It's men who are changing their thinking and changing their behaviors and going back into society to make a contribution. And interviews there, the questions that I guided them in was one-on-one. Tell me about an experience in your faith community. Tell me about a story from your tradition that is meaningful for you. And when you share experiences and you share heroes in your faith, people begin to really appreciate each other. And although we did not set it up to do this, it was interesting that after these interviews, one of the common things that they said, a Muslim would say, I want to introduce you to my new best friend. He's a born-again Christian, but here's the thing that I really appreciate about his religion. And a person from the Nation of Islam said, I've just met a guy who's a practitioner of Siddha Yoga, and I cannot believe how mindfulness is such a gift to me if I better understand it. The other thing is to be able to better understand my faith. And although the truth of my life is inside of me, it's only in conversations and sometimes your questions that I begin to discover it. One of the evolutionary progressions that I live by in terms of interfaith guidance is that it is the law that we tolerate each other. But I don't want to stay with just tolerance. We move to respect. I've learned to respect and to honor, but I want to take that third step to appreciation. I can't imagine my life without my brothers and sisters from other faith traditions.
Well, maybe some people might hear your comment and say, well, you're lucky to be in contact with people that are interesting or that you can trust or count on. I think it would be hard for them to say that after hearing you talk about working with men convicted of dangerous crimes in the prison. But a lot of us are afraid of other people. And so I want to ask, you drew my attention actually recently to an obituary for Sophia Farrar, who died at age 92 in the New York Times. And she was important because she gave the lie to the story that we all had about the New Yorkers who heard Kitty Genovese dying without anybody coming to her rescue. Talk about that situation and talk about why so many of us had such a wrong impression about what happened.
Well, I'm afraid there is some truth to the fact that only bad news gets reported. People serve in the neighborhood, people rescue someone, and that doesn't make the news. But if there's a shooting or if there's a robbery, and so negative news lasts longer. And I don't know why that story got started, but it was one that was repeated over and over again about all these people that heard this screaming and yelling and nobody responded. In the book Humankind that we both have read and are talking about, he talks about those stories that have become almost memes of truth. But when you analyze them and pull them apart, they are not true. Human nature is basically good. I'm a fan of Matthew Fox's Original Blessing, and I think that theologically and biblically I can make an argument that's far stronger than original sin. Human beings inherently long to be known and to know each other. What we have done in the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council is to continue that. Our vision is to be known and to know each other. And as I get to know you and your faith tradition, I understand and can embrace and feel better about mine, because we at our core want to work together and create something better and work and be in peace with each other. I don't know if that addresses your question. I see Aman, who has been working with inmates at the prison with Life Connections program there, and he's waving to us right now. And one of the things, none of those men are very frightening. They're not vicious criminals. They're human beings like you and I who made a stupid mistake, and their stupid mistake ended them up in prison. But they are not a mistake. They're human beings. And underneath all the brokenness that all of us have, underneath all the fear that some of us have, there is a human being who longs for greater connections to another human being.
David, I'm going to argue that interfaith understanding is too slight a thing. So I want to be clear. I obviously appreciate the human connections that you're making. So let me just try to sharpen my focus. And this is probably a leading question, so you better answer it right. It would, if you meet somebody of a faith other than your own, say a Muslim, is it more important for you to have the knowledge, the fact that the Quran is her holy book for that faith, or is it more important for you to ask about her life experiences, which may be enriched by her faith? Is the information about Islam more important, or about how she's been nurtured by
But you
her
obviously think information is important because your whole wall, you don't have a wall in your house, you only have books. You've studied religions a lot, and one of the reasons that people like me are attracted to you is because of your knowledge. But the answer to that question is, of course, I would much rather hear a story about that person. That's why as we build connections in the Interfaith Council, and as we build connections at the Gifts of Pluralism Conference, we want to know more about that person, because no two Christians are alike. No two Muslims are alike. No two Buddhists are alike. It's our uniqueness, and then that story has given us some framework in which to live our lives that becomes really interesting. Another evolutionary progression that I really like is that when we first hear something that happens, my first reaction is sympathy. I am so sorry that happened. We want to move that to empathy, to where we feel with another person or with a group. But finally, we want to move to compassion, which means that we are ready to do something. So Vern, help me to understand how we can move from just better understanding each other to building a better world. What can we do in terms of interfaith work and interfaith partnerships, more than just collaborating and listening to each other? What's the next step?
Well, frankly, I'm frustrated a lot by interfaith work because I think it will focus on commonalities, and even if we get to the point of saying that we theoretically accept the differences that we have, we really are not delving deep enough into understanding the core of the different faiths. And I don't mean a core that is going to be revealed by books. I mean a core that is revealed when faiths come into real, significant, hard encounter with each other, so that the rough edges get polished off as we rub against each other and become more translucent, even transparent gems to show the insights that that we have. And this is important to me, and I'm frustrated after working 35 years in the interfaith field that, speaking very personally now, I've been unsuccessful, it seems to me, in conveying that the insights of the world's religions are not abstract things that you do 1 or 2, 3 hours a week, but they go at the very core of the crises of our society.
Can you be more specific? What are the crises of our society?
I'm so glad you asked. I just think I might have a chart here that maybe I can share.
It's a small world, isn't it, Vern? That you happen to have a chart there.
You are, you know me well enough. All right, I'm going to try share screening, and let's see if this happens.
Some of you who are watching have seen this chart a number of times, I'm sure.
Well, maybe not this one, but
oh, this will do it. Okay.
What I've tried to show is that we have the three families of faith: Asian, primal.
You've got the other chart up there now. You've got one that says the profane, corrupted community.
Right. That's what I want to talk about.
Okay.
I want to say, I mean, does anybody have any question that our community is corrupted? Just look at the political situation that we have today. Look at the systemic racism. There's still systemic sexism. There's still all kinds of oppressions that distort and prevent us from becoming the beloved community that Martin Luther King talked about. So our community is corrupted. Personhood is violated. You know, the number of addictions that people are suffering from, compulsions, is overwhelming. And with the fires on the West Coast, with the melting glaciers, with the storms off the Atlantic, does any reasonable person who is aware of what's going on doubt that our environment is endangered? So the world is in crisis, and the remedy for this, I believe, is going to come not simply through technological advances, but will come through an understanding of the core of the primal Asian and monotheistic religions. So since you asked, David, I'm going to try to give you the slide you wanted. Let's see if I can do it there. So the core of Asian religions is in the understanding of personhood. Let me see if I can find an even better slide to illustrate that. Here's the family of faiths, which is a summary of my understanding of the insights that the world's religions have. The primal religions find the sacred in the world of nature, the Asians in the inner life, and the monotheistic faiths in human community. In Christianity and Judaism and Islam, it would be God working through history in community toward justice.
Aren't those all related, Vern?
They are, but let me answer that a little later. Okay, let me mention. I want to give an example of how they're all related, but would you save that question for a minute?
I will.
Thank you. You know, the Gifts of Pluralism conference ended with a statement about the three gems in the wisdom in the religions of the world. And the primal religions, which are in my research program, there are many ways of classifying world religions, but one way would be to ask the question, what is sacred? What is it on which your life depends? What is the source and origin of meaning for you? And the primal religions generally go to the world of nature to answer that. And the conclusion at the end of the Gifts of Pluralism conference was this: nature is to be respected more than controlled. It is a process which includes us, not a product external to us to be used or disposed of. Our proper attitude toward nature is not utility, but awe. Ever since Francis Bacon in about 1620 talked about natura vexata, vexing nature, contorting nature, using nature for our own purpose. And the example that I'm going to give is oil. We take it out of the ground and we put it in the air. We pollute even the oceans with the plastic that we make from it. So we're not concerned. Our culture is not concerned like the American Indian to show awe, but rather to grasp the products of nature instead of the gifts of nature. I need to move quickly, David. Personhood is the gem in Asian religions. And the Gifts of Pluralism conference concluded that personhood is deeper than selfish appearance. This means our actions best proceed beyond convention, spontaneously and responsibly from compassionate duty, without ultimate attachment to the results. Now, would you tell that to a corporation, which is an artificial person in our legal system? Our very perverse legal system makes corporations people, and the Supreme Court has granted the First Amendment right of free speech in the Citizens United case to corporations. So their goal is not a duty to the larger stakeholders instead, they're attached to the next quarter or the next year's profit.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second, Vern, and remind you that there are efforts within the corporate world which are resisting that. Last week's New York Times had a separate section on about a many decade-old article by the famous economist Friedman, and then there were contemporary responses to it that talks about not just the bottom line of profit, but the bottom line of community and social responsibility is becoming important. So we are getting a little niche in there to start working on some responses from personhood.
I saw that. I was glad to read that. And as a matter of fact, I waited tables on Milton Friedman at the Quadrangle Club at the University of Chicago. So I'm familiar with the Chicago School of Economics. And that was encouraging. So thank you for reminding me about that article, because I don't want to paint a gloom and doom picture, but I do not think our culture as a whole yet has turned from pursuing, we still have a culture of greed.
Yes.
I mean, that's pretty clear by the president that we have elected. Let me quickly summarize the third family of faith, the beloved community, which is the ideal, one way of expressing the ideal in the monotheistic traditions. It flows into history with justice and peace when persons govern themselves less by profit and more by the covenant of service. So here's a summary, and you can find this, a full chart on the CRES website. Just go to www.cres.org www.cres.org. Part of that full chart gives examples of secularism's crises. Now, David, because of the time, I'm not going to answer your question fully about how all of these crises and all of the gifts reinforce each other.
I do think we can agree that there are resources within our faith, our different religions, that can be used, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, to meet these crises.
So what I want people to do is, instead of just talking about, oh, what is your holy book? I want people to get to the core of their religion and realize, in the case of monotheist faiths, that we bring justice and peace to one another when we act with a concern for the values that undergird those faiths. And the chart again shows what I think those key virtues are. Nature is something to be held in awe. Our acts should be done not selfishly, but out of freedom, so that the ultimate expression of personhood is in the cosmos itself, and that the beloved community is realized when we abandon the notion of profit and instead adopt a notion of vocation. What can we do to help one another?
So I think that is the key question. What is the moving beyond understanding to compassion, moving beyond just understanding each other and liking each other? How do we work together to address these crises that we are facing in the world?
Thank you. Maybe, David, it's time to hear from some other voices.
I think that's a good idea.
Would you call on people as you notice?
Sure. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments that they would
or
like
arguments? I love arguments.
You can just rate, Josh? Yep.
Yeah, I've got one. So I like, David, that you articulated compassion to mean action. I think that that's important. And, you know, in the interfaith work that I've been exposed to, it is so frequently it's about awareness. So, well, isn't it nice that you have a holiday that's this month? And isn't it nice that we all think that people should get along? But the other side of this seems that, you know, how do we come together to do things unified? How do we go from interfaith understanding to interfaith work?
I think, I would like to take a response to that. I think we're seeing that every moment right now in the Black Lives Matter, the anti-racism, in confronting me and my white supremacy. We have been hearing some of that information for decades. I had the honor back in 1963 to hear one of the greatest speeches ever given in the United States, when our king talked about his dream. But what we're seeing now is people saying, we will not put up with this any longer. We will not just say, I'm sorry. We will not just say, it must be awful to feel that way. We're going to say, we are going to change the way interactions happen on the streets of our cities. We are going to change the way we are organizing our corporations. We are going to change the way we are going to interact with each other. And it's going to be arm in arm. I get to hang out with African Americans every Friday at Eggs and Enlightenment. And one of the things that the pandemic has pointed out to me is that we still are so separated because of class. The majority of them do not have access to Zoom, of the men and women that I meet with. The majority of many of our children in our city here in Kansas City do not have the same type of internet to connect with their schools. We have to see to it that we change. And Black Lives Matter has made that much more aggressive and I think assertive. And I think we're going to make some real progress. And of course, we have to vote. Voting becomes more important every day, every moment.
I'd like to tag on to that. First, applause, David. I agree with what you said. But I guess I have to add a but. And that is when we are keenly aware of our own agendas, which energize us. And again, I applaud and support Black Lives Matter. When we are aware of our own agendas, sometimes we forget the agenda of others. And what I'm really arguing for is an understanding of these three realms. They do mutually interpenetrate. But if we think that our agenda, the one that particularly energizes us today, is the only way, then it's very easy for us to forget that the other concerns are also part of the mix. I do think if we could solve the racial problem, it would affect and improve the environmental problem. I do believe that. So I'm not saying we all have to work on the same thing, but I am saying that I think we need to have a vision of the whole. And one thing that Interfaith has not successfully done, I think I want Josh's to argue with me on this, please. I don't think Interfaith has created yet a vision of the whole so that we can feel that we are doing something as part of a larger effort to bring about an awareness of what is sacred, that on which our lives depend. Can we ask Josh to respond?
Well, I don't know how I could respond other than agreeing with you. And I guess where the disconnect is for me, we can interpret social, political, economic movements through a religious lens. But what is the place of interfaith work, of religious work, of defining and working in the realm of the sacred in our, as you would say, Vern, increasingly desacralized worldview? In other words, what is the relevance? How do we, other than just say, I'm a religious person that's interested so I can go along with this socioeconomic political movement? And, you know, how do we gather together as an interfaith council or folks interested primarily in what has been conversations around holy texts and liturgy? And, you know, how do we make that connection in this desacralized environment that we're in?
Does anybody have an answer to that question? I think we have to keep asking it and pointing to it and always coming back. What is sacred about our activity? How are we being directed toward the sacred? Recognizing that the sacred is much larger and deeper than anything that we can articulate. And that we cannot put claim on it ourselves.
Andy? Andy, you need to unmute.
I think as long as people think that religion is something that happens in church, we continue to be in trouble. I like what I'm hearing today about making contact with something that you're calling the sacred, and I'm not sure that that language would work for everybody, but touching somehow on ultimate concern, on the places where people look for what sustains them in life, what sustains them in their contact with each other. I think you may have to get beyond some language here. And the trouble with interfaith is it sounds like a bunch of churchy people getting together. And it's one of the things that bothers me about church, is it often is committed to something that happens in that building or with a certain group of people who believe a certain set of things, rather than a set of people who have some ultimate concerns that overlap with each other. Unless you put your hand on that and touch that in your interactions with people, then I think you're just talking church to churchy people.
And I agree with that. I think we're preaching to the choir. I would really be interested in some secular language that points to what I'm referring to as the sacred, ultimate value, that on which our life depends. Andy, do you have a secular vocabulary that can help us get out of this church talk?
Well, sometimes the thing to say is what really matters. What really matters to you? Where do you get your sense of authority and being and assurance that life is worth living and going on with? When do you feel stirred in a special way that's very close to your core? Those are all languages that I would use with somebody who doesn't like church. I don't particularly like church. That's why I'm a Quaker. And that's what touches me, is when somebody says, that speaks to my condition, or that is close to my heart. Language like that sometimes gets through.
I appreciate that, and want to recognize the difficulty that we have, because the essence of secularity is that things are broken up. We are so fragmented, we don't have a language, a common language for these sorts of things. And
That's
our
right.
attention is pushed hither and thither, depending, I mean, you can't even read the New York Times without ads popping up here and there. I mean, it's been that way for a while, but it's getting worse with electronic media. So the fragmentation is one way of describing what I mean by a secularistic society.
Larry, you want to get on here?
Well, I just think one thing, I'd like to go back to some of the things you've already said. You know, the prophetic is really important and action is really important, but also the ability to meet one another and know one another. And I think that going beyond the individuality to the social thing, Vern, you've been a really big one about science. And I think on the secular point of view, the fact of systems, the ecology of things, that everything is related to everything, and everything is relationships. I think that comes in, so that it gives some balance to if we're looking at individual stories, we're realizing that everything's related, then we've got a big picture. And in that context, David, I think it makes sense to know when you're doing something prophetic. I often worry about how do you skirt the difference between being polemic, which has caused all the fights between religious groups, and then being overly ironic when you're talking about, kumbaya, shoulder to shoulder, don't pay any attention to the differences.
I found some helpful resources, a book that I'm reading right now, I'm in the middle of, Revolutionary Love by Rabbi Michael Lerner. He talks about creating prophetic empathy tribes. Empathy tribes is a term he uses, and caring economies. I think that that's secular language, but it carries a deeply spiritual meaning. Empathy and caring are words that I find helpful.
May I jump in here?
Please.
I'm a practicing Nichiren Daishonin Buddhist, and our mentor, Daisaku Ikeda, speaks of people becoming global citizens. And by becoming a global citizen, you are learning and creating value with compassion and empathy, and knowing that we are all interconnected. There's no difference in a human being. We all are the same. There's no difference. So
Is that Valerie speaking?
yes.
Valerie, thank you. And I think the concept of global citizen is absolutely profound. I love the bumper sticker, think globally, act locally. But my citizenship is a global citizenship. Ahmed, you
Yes,
can
please.
share.
I have some notes I want to talk with you about. First, Mr. Andy talked about religion. It shouldn't be only in the church. I am wondering if that's not against secularism, the separation between the state and the church. And I think that's one of the most important values America was built on. That is the first question. Number two, I want to ask about the moral and the religions, because actually people, they believe morals come from religion, but it is not true. It is not true. If you are a good person, you will be a good person, whatever you are, atheist, Muslim, Christian, Jew, whatever. Your religion come later after that. That's why I agree with Mr. David when he said, no, when you know some person, you don't need to know his book or his religion first. No, get to know the person first. I think the personality interrupt the book, explain the book. The person, how he act, that's will explain what is the Quran or what is the Bible or whatever. But not the Quran defined me or not the Bible defined you. It is not true. I believe also about something else about international citizen. I don't know, because we had problem, or because some people, they had problem because we are different. So we will cancel all our differences? No, we should to keep it. That's enrich us. And I don't agree about international citizen. No, we need to value our diversity, not to kill it or not to cancel or not to remove it. That is what I want to say. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. I think I would certainly embrace that we are not trying to make everybody think, believe, worship, sing, ritualize. I think there's much more fun in our diversity. That's why I said early on that if Vern would have come to me 30 years ago and said, hey, let's do a Gifts of Commonalities conference, he probably wouldn't have talked me into participating. But he designed a Gifts of Pluralism, celebrating and understanding and learning from. I understand myself better because I've learned how to meditate with Buddhists. I understand myself better because I've learned to look at fasting with Muslims. I understand myself better because I've been invited to a sweat lodge with a Lakota Sioux. The gifts that we have transform our lives so we can be persons who are stronger to resist the temptations that invade us. They make us more community to work for justice and can help us to live in harmony with the creation that we share with all. Who else has, I don't see other hands jumping up.
We have a question in the chat from Jason. Could you address the paradox of tolerance?
Jason, say more about the paradox of tolerance.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave me that opportunity, because that could be taken in different ways. And I don't mean that to be confrontational to all the suggestions you guys have been putting out, which have been fantastic. But a lot of what we're talking about is empathy between religions and in the interfaith community. But what I tend to think about, a lot of people have to deal with these days, is the political nature of trying to maintain empathy and humanity for people you're arguing with, who are sort of arguing on behalf of non-humanity, right? Like, we're arguing positions that are very threatening to other people's rights and humanity. And walking that line of trying to care for them, but also make sure you don't downplay how serious their threat to others is really a hard path to walk. And if you guys could speak to that in some way further than you already have, that would be fantastic.
Well, I think, Jason, you're really touching on something that's very sensitive to all of us. I think I'm understanding your question, that there are people whose religion is destructive. People whose...
Could I jump in?
Yeah, please correct that.
Sorry, and that is true. Certainly people have religious beliefs that can be destructive, but I'm thinking on the larger, and it's not even about religion. Anybody who has something that's threatening to others, and I want to both have empathy for them and respect them and try to understand their humanity, but often you can't fully embrace that without sort of giving in to the things they do that are detrimental to others, right? Like, I hate to bring in Godwin's law here, but if you're dealing with somebody who has not thoughts of Nazism, you know, you can't just embrace their humanity and downplay all these things that they're going to bring to others that are so harmful, right?
For me, I think it's important to maintain whatever kind of human connection you have in order that the Nazi recognizes that there are people who care about the Nazi, even if that person disagrees. It could develop, a political or military situation could develop in which sides have to be taken. And the Bhagavad Gita, for example, is about a war that even God could not stop. The Civil War in our own nation's history is about a conflict that even Lincoln could not stop. For me, the lesson in the Asian religions is that I need to be clear enough minded, clear-headed, not detached, not attached, but non-attached. I need to have my mind clear enough so that I can discern what my duty is for me in this particular situation. And there's no formula for that.
But I want to go back to, you sort of answered your question, Jason, a little bit when you said they are human beings too. If I can ask a question that can help them to tell me what's the pain, what's the life experience that they have experienced that brought them to this place of hate or violence or destruction. Sometimes just being able to articulate that becomes part of the healing process.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank David for being such a wonderful questioner and answerer. And I want to thank Geneva for arranging this conversation. And I want to thank all of the participants. I think I understand things a little better, actually. And I'm glad, Geneva, that you've recorded this, because a number of people said things and asked questions that I need to think about some more. And so I want to say, just say thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
And Vern, if anyone has questions, I think we may not have been able to get to all of the questions. I see some more came in the chat. If anyone, can they email you perhaps? Would it be okay to provide your email? I'm going to put your email in the chat. Just the vern@cres.org.
Yes.
David, did you have an email that you would be okay sharing if anyone has additional questions? I think you're muted. You're muted.
humanagenda@gmail.com.
Human agenda. Okay, so if your question was not answered, go ahead. You can contact both Vern and David. They've generously given that information, and hopefully you can further the conversation. I just want to thank everyone for participating. David, I didn't mean to cut you off before. Did you have a couple words you wanted to add?
Thank you.
Okay.
2 words.
Simple enough. Well, thank you, Vern and David, for sharing your wisdom and just for being here with us today. And to everyone who participated in the call, you all were very insightful and really enhanced this conversation. So, and there will be a recording available, and you can also watch it on Facebook Live right now once we log off here if you'd like to review some things that were said or share it with your friends. So thank you all so much. Any closing words, Vern or David? No? Final thoughts? All right. Well, goodbye, everyone. Have a great afternoon.